Word and Holy Spirit.
Amen.
I know that Mike Saunders, sitting over there, knows what an app is, and if he were to have his vest on and pull out his iPhone or his iPad, he probably could show you 1,000 or so apps that he has on those. Does everyone else know what an app is these days with this contemporary lingo? It's an application that one gets for one's smartphone. I have a new app. It's called My Altitude. It's not exactly accurate, but it's pretty close. It tells me at home my altitude is roughly 1,578 feet above sea level. Our Sandy Springs home is right about 1,100 feet, about 354 feet lower than Dahlonega Square. Here, it's a bit lower yet. I would show you on my iPad, but if I open the app on the iPad to begin with, I don't get reception in here. Second of all, some of you have complained when I've held up my iPad. And third of all, I might lose my spot. So I'm going to use my iPhone. Water will boil here on this level at 209.68 degrees Fahrenheit. And we are roughly, see it's jumping around a little bit because of the barometric pressure. We're roughly, I think we're at something under 1,200 feet right here. Does that sound about right, Tom? Yeah. It's good to have an engineer in the congregation. By the tourist guide, Mount Tabor, otherwise known as the Mount of Transfiguration, is a puny 1,800 feet. A fair bit of the United States is at an altitude that approaches or exceeds that of the Mount of Transfiguration. Our Blackfoot, Idaho home, now years ago, home to the Idaho spud and the sugar beet industry, sits on a vast plain, but between Idaho Falls and Pocatello, that home was at an altitude of 4,500 feet. The altitude of the 5th floor of St. Joseph's Hospital in Denver, Colorado, where Pat and I met now about 40 years ago, is roughly 6,000 feet. Thin air apparently figures well in the formula of long-lasting relationships. Hutchinson, in the flat state of Kansas, is at 1,542 feet. And the desert town of Mojave, in the Mojave Desert, is 1,800 feet and towers above the Mount of Transfiguration. Listen to this story. Jesus brings with him I was going to say three of his best friends, but Mark does not tell us that, nor does he imply that. Jesus brings with him 3 people who were close with him. They had the very exotic Semitic names of Peter, James, and John. We have several Johns that attend here. James or 2, and we have had a Peter. It could just have easily been Judy, Warren, and Pat. Jesus went to a place not very far away, not very inaccessible, with 3 common people. They happened to be fishermen. They could have been accountants. There in the presence of Jesus, these non-exotic people on a not very high mountaintop on a cloudy morning experienced God as really and truly present with them. I know most everyone here has experienced God in this very same way. And knowing that I know that the experience can be a bit disconcerting and confusing, we may not afterwards even be able to say what it is that happened. What exactly is this? Associations come to mind of grand ways of being and of grand experiences. These associations get stripped away as inadequate. Moses and Elijah. We were somewhere in the presence of God alone. That's all I can tell you. And Jesus somehow was the mediator of God, surpassing all other experiences. Ordinary people in ordinary time and space can and do experience the full presence of God. There are thin spaces all over the place. I was going to ask our children this morning to name a few of the most important things in their lives. And I will tell you, there's no telling what would have come out. But with Peter, James, and John, when they were with Jesus, experiencing God's presence, what came to their mind were the most important experiences of their life, the law and the prophets, Moses and Elijah. And the presence of Jesus was far more important than that and mediated God. The altitude of Dodoma, Tanzania, and therefore the altitude of Tanai, Tanzania, is 3,789 feet above sea level. It is situated on a vast African plain. Almost exactly 1 year ago today, I stood out in the equatorial sun. Tom was there, and Tim Teaslaw, and 400 or 500 people. And one after the other, I held 4 children with the names as common as Peter, James, and John, only in Swahili. I had to repeat those names, each one of them, and they were very difficult, but very common. They're on my wall in my office. We were surrounded by common men and common women and common children on the mountaintop of this vast African plain. There were no clouds to be seen in the sky, yet somehow in the context of these baptisms and the Holy Eucharist, in a language I did not understand, God was present and spoke. What happened? Ordinary people in ordinary time and space can and do experience the full presence of God through Jesus. That's what happened. Jesus was present with us and was transfigured and transformed us. You can go to Tanai with me, or you can come here, the Mount of our Transfiguration, and have the real presence of God in Jesus Christ, host and meal of the Eucharist. This presence here, this place here, this experience is authentic human being. And leaving from here, going back down the mountain to our villages, to our cities, to our homes, to our relationships, to our vocations, we may not be able to say just what exactly has happened to us, what we experienced, but we can bring people here to it, to hear the voice from the cloud. The presence of the resurrected Lord of life who uplifts all things to God is an experience that people can be brought to. It's called evangelism. It is not an experience, however, that can be talked about very clearly, for it is not a claim about ourselves, but rather a claim that points elsewhere. St. Paul puts it this way. For we do not proclaim ourselves. We proclaim Jesus Christ as Lord, and ourselves as servants for Jesus' sake. For it is the God who said, "Let light shine out of darkness," who has shone in our hearts to give the light of knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. That's what we're doing here. It is difficult to tell others about the light in one's heart. It is better to bring them to the mountaintop, to have them experience the fullness of humanity in God's presence themselves. Lent begins on Wednesday. Lent is an altered state of consciousness by design and by decision and by intention, and it is difficult to do. It is an attempt to remain on the mountaintop in the presence of God, even as we go about our daily routines in the valleys of our lives. And Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." The dwellings of Moses and Elijah, in the words of Peter, are the pretenses of our lives that keep us sheltered from the real presence of God. We, and all humanity with us, have an inordinate fear of holiness of being. We have a fear of God. The Bible is full of references about it. The fear of fire is the fear of God. We are called, as we approach this holy season, to live more fully renouncing fear and the pretenses, the tents and shelters that keep us from holiness. As you know, because as I have told you several other times, Abba Lot went to see Abba Joseph and said to him, "Abba, as far as I can, I say my little rule of prayer. I fast a little. I pray and meditate. I live in peace as far as I can. I purify my thoughts. What else can I do?" And the old man stood up and stretched his hands towards heaven. His fingers became like 10 lamps of fire. And he said to them, "If you will, you can become all flame." In the name of the Father, and of the Son,